So we're discussing here Marshall McLuhan's essay, Culture Without Literacy. And he was going on to talk about the mechanical clock, for example, which created a wholly artificial image of time as something rectilinear and uniform, and that may even have laid the basis, he says, for the rectilinearity of the printing press and the way the print is laid out on the page, which is also now something that becomes pregnant with the coming of the assembly line. Siegfried Gideon points out in Mechanization Takes Command how the assembly line emerged actually out of the slaughterhouses in Cincinnati, where they put pigs hanging off of hooks and began to disassemble them piece by piece along this. So that's something that came about in the 19th century, so it comes much later, but it's already that rational, linear, step-by-step process that comes out of the mechanical clock, and which in turn makes the printing press and the mechanization of print possible with movable type. All that is, it all comes out of the Gutenbergian galaxy, the Gutenbergian world. And so the printed book was the first instrument of mass culture, and what it does is it takes the past and dumps it into the present. McLuhan later will make this point that every medium, inside every medium is an older medium. So media are holographic in this sense, or holonomic rather. They come in and they swallow up previous media. So the content of the printing press are all the manuscripts that came before it. They get dumped right into it. And later, for example, the content of film is the novel, and the content of this medium here that we're using now, YouTube, is all previous, or the internet as a whole is all previous forms of electronic communication. Everything from movies to radio to anything electronic has been swallowed up now by the internet. So the medium is indeed the message, because the medium changes the message that goes through it. It makes possible only certain kinds of messages which go through them, and that's McLuhan's main point. He's not yet making it here in this essay, but he will make it. The medium is the message because the medium determines the nature of the content that can go through it. Anything that goes through television is entertainment, for example. There is no such thing as educational television. It's all entertainment. That's the nature of television as a medium. So it doesn't matter. Objections to a medium based on, if a child is reading comic books, parents should not object to this because the child is reading. It's the medium there that matters, training the mind to read. It doesn't matter what's being read. It's the medium itself, acquainting oneself with it. That's why Neil Postman made the point later that Sesame Street was not a friend to learning. It wasn't an aid to the process of educating children, because it simply taught kids how to like television. It's the medium that counts. The medium changes what goes through it. And that's the important point here. And one of the things about media, one of the hidden dimensions about media, is that every new medium is engulfing and swallowing up a previous medium. And often this happens in a way that we aren't aware of. Television swallowed up the movie, and so forth and so on. So the new print also at the time mingled with old. This was a gradual process. When the printing press came along, it disintegrated 2,000 years of manuscript culture in a matter of decades, just as we now with the internet are disintegrating 500 years of the Gutenbergian world in just a matter of a decade or so, decade and a half. So there's been an acceleration in our case. And Shakespearean drama is something that emerged out of this hybrid interface between old oral cultural forms and the new print forms. And you can see the tension in there in Shakespeare's plays. Then he goes on to talk about how the newspaper is essentially, though it is part of the Gutenbergian galaxy and came out of it, the first newspapers I think come into being around the end of the 17th century, middle of the 17th century. They come in about the same time as the stock market, as the Dutch in Amsterdam are inventing the stock market, and one of the primary things about the newspaper was to have a medium that could keep track of the stock exchange. So the rise of the stock market in the middle of the 17th century is connected with the rise of the newspaper, the first newspapers coming in there. But then McLuhan says the thing about the newspaper is that it really is antipathetic in many ways, especially the later transformations of the newspaper in the 19th century to the Gutenbergian world, because whereas with a book page you basically have, the book basically is compatible with Renaissance art, insofar as Renaissance art invented depth perspective in painting, where you have the creation of a single point of view and a subject, so you have the subjectivation of space, in the creation of visual, abstract, linear space, the idea of space as a container inside which things are placed. And the book itself puts knowledge, facts, opinions into perspective, especially as it has been put into perspective by a single author, who creates, therefore, a single point of view. So the printed book is compatible with Renaissance art, whereas the newspaper is more pointed towards Cubism and Surrealism, because what you have on the page of newspaper are multiple book pages placed one beside the other. And what you also have there, of course, are stories and events taken from different parts of the globe, all over the world, and lined up one beside each other, so that you have not a single point of view at all, but multiple points of view, and you get this. The only thing that hangs them together is the date line and maybe an impressionist technique of a headline that creates a sort of aura or theme for that page. But mostly what you have are multiple points of view, multiple perspectives. The newspaper is already heralding the coming of Einsteinian electrodynamics, in which each object moves in its own space, creates its own space, and creates its own time, its own spatio-temporal frame of reference. Time is a relative thing we know now as a result of Einstein. Time moves differently. Clocks that are closer to the ground move at different speeds from ones that are out of a gravitational well, which will move faster. So time is entirely relative, but this was already forecast in the coming of the newspaper. The newspaper is a kind of symbolist art masterpiece. Symbolist art is simply an art form in which all the connections are pulled out, like in haiku, where you have 3 lines that evoke an entire landscape, and all the connections are simply missing, and it's left to the viewer or the audience to fill in the connections. Same thing in jazz. With syncopation in jazz, you simply pull out the notes, and you get jazz. In the detective story, you pull out the connections, and the reader assembles it. It's a kind of a do-it-yourself approach. The reader participates in the scientific method by having all these clues that he then has to put together, because all the connections between the clues have been removed. Or if he doesn't put them together, then by the end of the story, the sleuth will assemble them and create the movie film and project it forward. In the detective novel, you start, the temporal sequence is reversed. You start with the end, the dead body, and then you rewind backwards step by step to find out how that dead body came to be. So it's a reversal of the traditional media laws. So the newspaper is a very different, medium, and it also comes into being when the telegraph comes in the 1820s and 1830s. The electric telegraph basically had the effect of plugging the newspaper in and turning it on and sending electric current going through it, so that knowledge and information began coming in as a kind of news from nowhere, addressed with anonymous sources to anonymous receivers, news from nowhere, addressed to nobody in particular, but coming in now at the speed of light instantaneously, and that configures a whole new epoch. And at the same time as this is going on, this sort of everything all at onceness at electric speed up, notice that when an object attains light speed, it creates its own space-time. Time and space collapse for it. The object collapses into 2 dimensions, gains infinite mass, and attains its own frame of reference. So when there's this acceleration and speed up to everything all at once, you have the creation of icons and mythic images, and then we get modern art out of this as a result of all this electric speed up. The reversal of time and space in slow motion Newtonian linearity, the creaking world of windmills and trimasters, is traded off at the speed of light for the world of myth, because myth compresses and simplifies complex morphological processes into hieroglyphic compression. A single image, a myth is a single image that compresses an entire process that has to be unfolded if it's to be understood linearly. So this is why modern art comes into being, and it becomes inspired out of mythology, African masks and tribal art, and this 2-dimensional iconism of the primitive world, or what used to be known as the primitive world. So those are the media that he talks about in this book, and in this essay rather, and he ends by saying that one of the points he makes is that there needs to be then, there's a divorce, a disjunction between the sciences and the humanities, and the book culture has been built around understanding the humanities, and it tends to divorce the literary types from understanding the technological forms. McLuhan himself started as a literary critic, and he taught himself how to understand technological forms, And we need, according to him, at this point, some kind of a unified field view of the sciences and the humanities in order to understand how modern art in the sciences, modern art, poetry, painting, and the sciences are all doing the same thing, but you need a kind of unified field approach to understand that. Just like in Einsteinian physics and what came after it, there was this quest for a unified field that would boil everything down to a simple set of equations that would make then all the other sciences fit together as a sort of single package. And McLuhan's in quest of that at this point, and of course we know what he's going to find. It'll be his book Understanding Media, which will then give him the unified field approach to understand any single aspect of culture whatsoever, whether it's a poem, a telephone, a computer, a Macintosh, a novel, a movie. He will evolve a unified field approach that will enable him to jack in and understand how any of these media work and understand their morphodynamics. McLuhan is the Einstein of media. He was the first to understand the morphodynamics of media and how they work. And you can already see in this essay here that is what he's on the way to. And what I want to do is read more essays in this collection and do more videos that track him as he's building what will eventually become the big themes of understanding media, with ideas like media hot and cool, the medium is the message, the difference between visual space and the electric acoustic space, what he calls he will later call electric space acoustic space, whereas visual space will become strictly identified with the Renaissance and the perspectival world of that culture, the Gutenbergian galaxy. In this essay, he's still using the word visual in the opposite sense to the way he'll use it later on. Later on, he uses it to mean abstractly visual. When he says visual, he means literate visual space. The sense of the printing press steps up the sense of sight, just as in Renaissance art, the sense of sight is stepped up to such a degree that it unifies space as a complete container, a visual space. And so he uses visual in that sense later on, but here he's still using it to refer to how you would think it would be, imagistic visual, concrete, sensuous images. So he's still contrasting, at this point, visual in that sense with traditional pre-Gutenbergian culture to contrasting that to abstractly visual. Later he'll get rid of that distinction and it will just be the distinction between visual as the abstract, the Gutenbergian, versus the pictographic or the electroacoustic space. And we'll see why in a later essay why he names electrodynamical space acoustic. It has this acoustic, to begin with, I mean, just quickly before we sign off here, acoustic space we hear in a sphere, a 360-degree radius, but electricity comes at us also via these media from all directions in a 360-degree sphere. So it's acoustic in that sense, but it also is discontinuous, whereas visual space harmonizes and unifies. It creates a continual space, but it fragments culture by specializing and favoring the specialist and specialization. Acoustic space creates disconnected spaces, paradoxically. It steps down vision. To the blind man all things are sudden, McLuhan says. It steps down vision and steps up the other senses. And so its acoustic space is discontinuous space, but yet it's spherical. So it seems as though it were something that, and it favors the generalist. And he'll say later too that some of these modern media, like the computer, favors the generalist. One of the things he says is, "Come into my parlor," said the computer to the specialist. So the computer is the enemy of specialization, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing how the computer is slowly, via the internet, pulling everything together, even while it's dismantling 5 centuries of Gutenbergian thought, which is what my book, The New Media Invasion, where I've tried to continue the McLuhan project into the internet age and try to see what really is happening today. That's where my inspiration came from. So we'll look at some more of these McLuhan essays.